Hello and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Specialist CASTILLO Mundee, and today I'll introduce the concepts of interpersonal communication and the most common application that you see today in modern Army leaders. I will also discuss the importance it has in the Army and how it positively and negatively affects day-to-day operations. Before we get started with this block of instruction, I would like to point out safety considerations. In the event of an emergency, there is an exit door on the right hand side and there's an exit door on the left hand side. Other things to consider are environmental considerations. Please dispose of your trash as you're leaving the area to maintain a healthy cleanliness and work environment, especially with all the COVID-19 considerations to take in mind. Make sure to adhere to social distancing and follow all social distancing guidelines. Okay. Before understanding the concept of interpersonal communications and how it is used, it is important to understand what is interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication takes place where there is a transmission of information from one individual to another, where a sender passes an idea to a receiver. There are four major types in the Army that you see for interpersonal communication. The first being verbal communication. Verbal communication is described as using a strong, confident speaking voice, using active listening and actually listening to what is being said to you and reciprocating effectively toward it. And avoiding filler words such as or I'm not saying to totally avoid these words when you're speaking, because as long as you're getting your point across, it's okay. But the reasons why you avoid these filler words such as or is because it gives the impression to the audience in which you are trying to verbally communicate with that you are not fully confident in information that you're presenting. So as long as you're on track on providing clear and concise guidance, then it would be okay. The importance of verbal communication from leaders to subordinates is essential to provide clear and concise guidance and expectations of a task through word of mouth. For example, a leader that demonstrates good verbal communication skills to their subordinates, then completion of a task such as PMCSing a truck or getting things done on Mortar Pro Monday can be done in a timely manner as long as the leader provides and communicates proper timelines and standards to things how it can be done. If verbal communication is taking place, clear verbal communication is taking place, then there's minimal room for misinterpretation. The next major type of interpersonal communication is nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is using body language, facial expressions, and hand gestures to convey a message to your subordinates or audience. In the Army, nonverbal communication is important when verbal communication isn't an option, meaning when the leader cannot communicate to its subordinates through verbal communication or any sort of communication. A good example of nonverbal communication is best utilized in a combat environment. If the sound of gunfire is too loud for a leader to give their subordinates the proper instruction or guidelines or commands, then the leader must utilize hand and arm signals. The hand and arm signals may vary due to unit SOPs or standard operating procedures, but the purpose still remains the same throughout the Army, to communicate without using words. Another good example of nonverbal communication that taking place in the Army is when you're using noise and light discipline. When noise light discipline is implemented, sometimes using verbal communication can give away a friendly position to the enemies. So a leader must rely on nonverbal communication to give clear and concise direction in order to effectively maneuver and engage on the enemy. The next type of interpersonal communication skill that we're going to talk about today is written communication. Written communication is through things that you see in the Army like papers, essays, memos. We all have seen enough of those. We see written communications take place everywhere in the Army. whether that be a memo for the COVID-19 pandemic, or guidelines for minimal manning policy, or for even something like a monthly counseling that the leader gives a subordinate to assess monthly performance and to discuss their overall short-term and long-term goals. Written communications usually take an important role when information is being put out that has minimal to no room for misinterpretation at all. The last type of interpersonal communication skill that we will discuss today is visual communication. Reasons on why this type of communication is important can be that not everyone can form a same picture in their head by simply hearing words or reading words on paper. Tools such as PowerPoint or terrain models are the most common type of visual communication that you see today in the Army. Reasons being is that using this type of visual communication takes away the guessing game for imagining or visualizing the way something should look or the way something should be done. But instead, it can give a subordinate more confidence in the expectations that are expected through them to complete the task and to complete the overall mission. Knowing and understanding the different types of interpersonal communication skills is important when trying to implement clear and concise information in specific situations. The lack of knowledge of these skills only lead to confusion and frustration in subordinates and affect the outcome negatively of the overall mission. Guidance can be cloudy or misunderstood. To summarize the topics talked about today about interpersonal communications and how they categorize and how they are utilized in the Army, just remember these things. Verbal communication is through word of mouth. Nonverbal communication is through body language and facial expressions. And like we talked about earlier, hand and arm signals. Hand and arm signals are crucial when noise and light discipline is being implemented. The enemy cannot hear you move through the woods so that you can maneuver effectively on them and destroy them. Visual communication is a given. It's when you're watching videos on how something's done. It's a PowerPoint presentation on how to do land nav. And written communication, just clear and concise guidelines written down on a piece of paper for all to read so that not one person has to give multiple speeches. It's essential to be aware of these 4 types of major interpersonal communication skills because they can either make or break the overall success of an organization by making sure subordinates are getting clear, concise guidance. By knowing which type of skills to use and when to use it, affect the outcome of mission success and reduce the stress in leader subordinates, which makes the Army a more pleasant professional work environment. Leaders should strive to improve their interpersonal communication skills every day and always ask for feedback from their subordinates. This initiative taken is essential to overall mission success. So before you guys leave here today, I need you guys to clean up your trash, make sure to maintain all social distancing guidelines. Are there any questions?